Greetings, dear viewers. The history of building various types of vehicles has seen the creation of extremely extravagant and unusual designs. There are even entire subtypes of machinery designed for specific conditions and tasks. For example, screw-propelled vehicles, about which I made a detailed episode 2 years ago. A car, as we usually understand it, is a four-wheeled vehicle that is driven by those very wheels. That is, the power from the engine is somehow transmitted to a certain number of its wheels. However, how about the idea of making a car move using an air propeller? Sounds pretty crazy? Maybe. But a number of engineers from the early and mid-20th century would not agree with you. I'll tell you about this rare and unusual technology in this episode. Join me for a brief look at propeller-driven cars, or as they're sometimes called, Aerocars. You're watching Crasmodo Channel. Enjoy the show. Aerocars are a colorful, interesting, and unusual chapter in the history of automobile manufacturing. These vehicles may seem illogical, but they did exist, and at one point or another some engineer saw potential in this design. We will try to understand the history of this amazing technology, its features, and its capabilities. However, due to the limited information and the rarity of propeller-driven cars, it's possible that some example might escape my attention. Aerocars have both advantages and disadvantages. Their design is extremely simple. You need a chassis, an engine, and a propeller. There's no need for a transmission clutch, mechanisms to drive the wheels from the gearbox, and so on. An Aerocar moves more confidently over certain surfaces, for example, fairly compact sand. On the other hand, the disadvantages are obvious. When operating, the propeller lifts dust, sand, leaves, and even small stones into the air. Heavy traffic of these vehicles on roads would be impossible, and the windows in cars and roadside buildings would have to be replaced regularly. The propeller used on a ground vehicle is a very dangerous thing, especially if you imagine that air cars suddenly became not exotic prototypes made individually, but a relatively common phenomenon. Propeller-driven vehicles have certain difficulties when climbing steep hills, and naturally they are extremely noisy. Not everyone would agree to experience what a World War I pilot felt during everyday travel in a car.
Are you going to prime it, James?
Compression point is about there. You ready?
Well, I don't know what's going to happen. How can I be ready?
The propeller, or screw, was an important invention in the history of transportation development. It is a blade-type propulsion device that creates thrust when rotating by pushing air or water backward at an increased speed. It is claimed that the idea of the screw dates back to the invention of Archimedes, and then humanity gradually progressed in the pursuit of new knowledge. Propellers, their properties, and possible applications, hundreds and thousands of engineers have studied this topic. We won't go deeper into this topic. It's enough for us to understand that by the second half of the 19th century, all the conditions were in place for the rapid development of engine building, and with it, the possibilities for using the propeller. On ships, after the adoption of steam power, propellers replaced oars and sails. At the end of the 19th century, the idea of the airplane propeller and the possibility of making the first flight of a heavier-than-air machine excited the minds of engineers and enthusiasts. Many of them worked in workshops and created prototypes that, in their opinion, should be able to fly. As you know, the first flight was made on December 17, 1903 by the Americans, brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright. But even before that flight, propellers had already been tested for several decades on stands to measure thrust parameters in order to select the most suitable characteristics for the airplane propeller. At the same time, humanity invents the motor carriage, the automobile, and one fine day the idea is born to build a car powered by the thrust of an airplane propeller. It is likely that this idea was born during the testing of the airplane propeller on a stand in the form of a wheeled cart. Aerosleds, whose history is covered in a separate episode on my channel, were actually also born from a test stand equipped with runners for sliding on snow or ice. And the version I mentioned is confirmed by the first and probably the earliest propeller-driven vehicle under review. Say hello to Glenn Curtis, a pioneer of American aviation and motorcycles, and an engine builder. Regular viewers of my channel are already well acquainted with this mustachioed guy. In this photo, he is shown on an Aerocar of his own design. The year is 1906. This is probably one of the earliest propeller-driven cars. However, this design was built exclusively for testing propellers that were intended to be installed on Thomas Scott Baldwin's airships. In fact, this isn't even a car, but rather a wheeled test stand. The image quality is poor, but apparently the propeller is driven by a V-twin engine through a wide belt with a significant gear ratio. Curtis himself said about this cart, "This machine, although it has no commercial value, is quite practical and easily reaches a speed of 45 kilometers per hour. Needless to say, it scares horses away perfectly, raises a huge cloud of dust when moving along the road, and even tears leaves off trees whose branches hang low." End of quote. However, there is another propeller cart claiming to be the first. It was built by Captain Louis Ferber in 1903. Louis had a significant influence on the development of French aviation, and he built more than one such cart to test propellers. In the following years, more and more engineers experimented with this idea, mainly to create a vehicle capable of reaching high speeds in competitions and races. But there were also attempts to create a mass-produced wind-powered vehicle. Do propeller cars seem strange to you? Windcycles are even more unusual machines, and the first of them was built in the same year as the earliest Aerocar, in 1906. Presenting to you the Archdeacon Enzani propeller motorcycle. Although the name Alessandro Enzani is associated with this machine, the motorcycle racer was actually just chosen to test the Aero motorcycle, as it was called. It was built for the Frenchman Ernest Archdeacon, who is in the suit on the left. He was one of the first promoters of automobile manufacturing and aviation. The motorcycle was built for testing propellers and was not meant to be driven on the road alongside pedestrians. The frame and engine were made by the Boucher Company, where Enzani worked. Enzani was just about to leave to start his own company. The two-cylinder, 6-horsepower V-shaped Boucher engine drove the propeller at a speed lower than the engine speed, using a belt 1.5 meters long. Although the motorcycle was built to test the propeller, there are no signs of any instruments on it, not even a speedometer. Presumably, the performance was measured solely with a stopwatch over a set distance. But there is much less information about this tricycle. It is known that it was built in Britain in the first half of the 1910s, before the First World War. The Aero tricycle was equipped with a V-twin engine, and steering was done by turning the rear wheels. The tractor propeller had one obvious drawback. It blew a lot of air directly onto the driver. This was especially noticeable in designs that did not include any kind of cowling or windshield. Since we're talking about Windcycles, I'll tell you about a few more prototypes and then we'll get back to cars. This Aero bicycle was built in the 1920s by the Peugeot company. It was equipped with a single-cylinder, 2-stroke C-cam engine with air cooling and a displacement of 100 cc, which was not particularly powerful. The pedal drive to the rear wheel was retained. The bicycle was not intended for mass production and was more of an exhibition prototype. The two-blade propeller was equipped with a protective casing. The surviving Peugeot Aerobicycle is located at the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville, Tennessee, USA. And here is another prototype from France in the 1920s, the De Dion Aerobicycle. It looks quite similar to the Peugeot replica, but there are a number of differences, such as the propeller, its mounting, and the 175cc motobeacon, 175 two-stroke engine. Another prototype was created in Britain in the 1930s. This tricycle was designed by the Hardings Company, which at one time was successful in making wheelchairs. The tricycle was equipped with a French Labanal micromotor engine, manufactured in Paris from 1922 to 1928. These were engines with a capacity from 35 to 50 cubic centimeters and a power output of up to 1 horsepower. When this tricycle was built is unclear, either in the 1910s or the following decade. It is known that this is a French tricycle called cocher, which in French means helicopter, and this is undoubtedly a reference to the unprotected propeller. It is believed that the V-twin engine was manufactured by the company Poinsert. But according to Wikipedia, Poinsert apparently only produced flat engines. Already in the 21st century, several enthusiasts have offered their own vision on the topic of a propeller bicycle. Here is a design from 2003 called the Fan Bike. It was created by John Wildbank. The subframe with the engine and propeller is quite large, and to prevent the bicycle from tipping over, 2 additional wheels had to be used on the sides. And here is a more elegant design, the thrust pack. Essentially, it's a backpack with a propeller and a small internal combustion engine. The thrust pack has been produced since 2006 by Pacific Wind in 2 versions, with thrust of 5 and 6.8 kilograms. The thrust pack jetpack is positioned as a means of increasing mobility. Whether you're traveling by canoe, kayak, skis, or bicycle, the thrust pack will speed up your movement. For example, on a bicycle, this device allows you to travel at a speed of 55 kilometers per hour, and on a kayak, up to 20. A fuel reserve of 0.6 liters is enough for an hour to an hour and a half of activity. And finally, here is the most modern iteration of the Windcycle, now equipped with a battery and an electric motor. Aerobike 2014 from Grandy Cooperation. The manufacturer claims that the bicycle can reach 40 kilometers per hour using only the propeller, and the battery capacity is enough for a range of 100 kilometers. Grandy Cooperation believed that their version had an advantage over regular electric bicycles because it didn't have the heavier hub motors, but in reality they were wrong. The use of a propeller limited where the aerobike could be used for safety reasons, and the acceleration, especially from a standstill and at low speeds, was very weak compared to e-bikes with a classic hub motor. There are also several modern DIY projects of motorcycle bicycles with a propeller that you can come across on YouTube, and these DIY projects are made primarily for hype, to get views, probably to gain popularity and make some money. In fact, to be efficient at both low and high speeds, an air propeller needs to have a variable pitch. However, most of the vehicles reviewed in this episode are equipped with fixed pitch propellers. This is a cheaper and simpler solution, but the propeller will either have good thrust characteristics, let's say, at low speeds, or on the contrary, it will allow for higher speeds at the expense of acceleration at low speeds. So let's get back to Windmobiles. After the debut of the first Aerocar designed by Glenn Curtiss in 1906, a number of fundamentally similar vehicles soon followed. The 1910s were full of attempts to design cars with propellers. At that time, there were no established concepts of the automobile, and many bold ideas were often brought to life in metal. By the way, here's an interesting fact. Early prototypes of cars with propellers were called by a term that sounds like windwagon. Literally, it means wain cart. This four-wheeled aeromobile was developed in 1908 by Julian P. Thomas, a doctor, aeronaut, and motorist. Julian is known for his record-breaking balloon flights. The first prototype of the Windwagon had a pusher propeller. In 1908, Thomas was seriously injured while testing his creation before an aviation exhibition at the Morris Park Aerodrome. He crashed while trying to avoid a collision with a motorcyclist who was also preparing for the exhibition. By 1909, the second prototype was ready, now with a tractor propeller. At the wheel of the Aerocar in this photo is Charles Crowd before the start of the race. The machine was built on the chassis of a certain production car, You can notice the driven sprocket on the rear axle, which is missing its chain. The propeller was driven by a large 4-cylinder engine, but details about its specifications are not available. It is reported that the car with the propeller demonstrated an impressive speed. A year later, 3 more designs debuted. This 3-wheeler is the least known among them. There is only one photograph, dated 1910, and no other information. A bit more is known about the second Aerocar. This 3-wheeled car was built either in Germany or Austria, since the word Probewagen, meaning test car, is written on the back in embossed letters. The Windmobile was equipped with a V-twin engine that directly drove the propeller. On both sides of the propeller, there was a primitive protective guard. The third Aerocar from 1910 is the best known. This Windmobile was created by the Overland Company for advertising purposes. It made its public debut in June 1910 at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during an aviation competition. The Windwagon joined 11 airplanes at the first National Aviation Show in the United States. At the wheel was Karl Baumhofer, the chief test driver for the Overland Company. The 245-centimeter wooden pusher propeller was located at the rear of the vehicle. Baumhofer managed to reach a speed of 85 kilometers per hour, which surprised him greatly. The Windwagon crossed paths with the Wright brothers airplane, piloted by Walter Brookins, a star of aviation competitions, in an exhibition race. Although the race was unofficial, Brookins was declared the winner. In this photograph, a little-known racing Aerocar is shown. The photo was taken at the track in Newark, New Jersey in 1910. The 2-bladed propeller was driven directly by the crankshaft. The next car under review was built by the British company ABC in 1911, and the main purpose it was designed for was testing aircraft propellers. The prototype was developed by Mr. Lane, who is sitting next to the driver, Mr. Charteris. In this photograph, the car is at the Brooklands racetrack on May 27, 1911, where it arrived from Southampton powered solely by the propeller. The Aerocar was moving early in the morning. Obviously, the time was specifically chosen to minimize the number of road users for safety reasons. The car was equipped with an 80-horsepower V8 engine made by the All-British Engine Company. During the trip from Southampton, the engine was running at 900 revolutions per minute, providing a propeller thrust of about 150 kilograms. Here, friends, is the Aerocar called the Auto Aero, designed by the Frenchman Count Bertrand de Lesseps, son of Ferdinand de Lesseps, who took part in the construction of the Suez Canal. On Lesseps's Aerocar, the shaft from the 30-horsepower engine ran along the entire length of the vehicle under the body floor, and through a chain, drove the shaft with the propeller. The wind-powered vehicle was presented to the public in 1912 at the exhibition in Brussels. Bertrand quickly realized that the vehicle was not suitable for traveling on public roads, and around the same time, he learned that in the winter of 1913, snowmobile competitions would be held in Russia. For this event, he hastily converted the propeller-driven car into an aerosled. Another Frenchman, Corporal Gustave Cross, created a wind-powered vehicle called the Cross Sauterelle in the same year, 1912. The extremely elaborate 6-wheeled machine was designed to carry out combat missions in the desert, which made up most of France's North African colonies. The propeller was directly attached to the 7-cylinder rotary engine. This is a version of a radial engine in which the crankshaft is rigidly fixed to the chassis, and the engine itself rotates around the crankshaft. The chassis was quite interesting. It had an unusual 6-wheel configuration, with 4 rear wheels arranged in pairs and able to tilt, presumably to make it easier to traverse rough terrain. This version of the cross-propeller car received a different body and a 4-bladed propeller. The number of wheels was also doubled for better performance on sand. This excerpt from the magazine L'Automobile Coloniale shows a top view of the cross car and mentions details of one of the trips. The quote belongs to General Maurice Bayud. "We left Biskra with Corporal de Waitin as the mechanic, and it took us hours to reach Touggourt at an average speed of 50 kilometers per hour, despite a series of terrible road sections along the way. Our arrival was more sensational than if we had come by airplane because we drove straight down the main street in a cloud of dust, sliding the propeller past walls and passers-by. The illustration clearly shows what terror this vehicle inspired in the cavalry. Here are a couple more little-known Aerocars from the first half of the 1910s. The first design was probably used for racing. I wonder if the pilot was concerned about how close the propeller drive pulley was to his back. In this German-language publication from 1912, a British Windmobile design is shown. It is equipped with a 7-cylinder rotary engine. Notice the extensive use of wire bracing, as was common in airplanes of that era. This was probably done in an attempt to reduce weight. This Windmobile, built by Lieutenant Lafargue in 1913, was also intended for the North African French colonies. The practical use of this vehicle is highly questionable. The cloud of dust it raised gave away its position, and using it in close coordination with other branches of the military was very doubtful, all because of the omnipresent dust. François Garbacchio, from the canton of Valais in southern Switzerland, built this wind-powered vehicle between 1908 and 1915 in the city of Sierre, Switzerland. This vehicle is notable because a short video from that time has survived, showing the wind-powered car in motion, and also because 2 men can easily lift it, which shows that its weight was quite low. In the photograph, you can see floating tanks attached to the sides and the back, which means the car was an amphibious vehicle. The propeller had a diameter of about 2 meters and was powered by a 3-cylinder Anzani aircraft engine. It was intended that the vehicle would reach a speed of 100 kilometers per hour on land and 50 on water. It is highly unlikely that it actually achieved this. Garbacchio's car was built as a one-off. The Césaire Berwick Company was an Anglo-French car manufacturer that existed from 1913 to 1927. With the start of World War I, the British Admiralty ordered an Army armored windmobile. The Césaire Berwick Aerocar was ready in 1915. The Admiralty, like the French military, placed hopes on the effectiveness of moving a propeller-driven car across the sands of the Middle Eastern deserts. Only one prototype was built. Its tests were conducted in Britain. Apparently, the results were not very encouraging. The Césaire Berwick was equipped with a Sunbeam aircraft engine with 110 horsepower. The armor consisted of steel plates. The vehicle could carry 2 people, the driver and the gunner. The wind car was equipped with a Vickers machine gun of 7.69 millimeters. The armored car weighed 4 tons. Its dimensions were as follows: length 4.3 meters, width 1.7 meters, height 2 meters. Let's move across the ocean. American Spencer Heath founded the American Propeller Manufacturing Company in 1909 and succeeded in mass-producing propellers. He manufactured 70% of the propellers used in the United States during World War I. This rough-looking wind car with a V8 aircraft engine was created by Spencer solely to test the first variable and reversible pitch aircraft propeller called Paragon, which he also invented. The tests were conducted on October 11, 1922, at Bowling Field in Washington. In this photograph, you can see the German aeromobile called Adele, which was used as a taxi. The photograph is dated 1922. Notice the roof, which smoothly transitions into the propeller guard. And this extravagant airplane car by a certain A. Russell, dated 1924, was equipped with decorative wings and a tail stabilizer. The car definitely attracted a lot of attention, but nothing is known about its specifications. It's also impossible to say for sure whether it was powered exclusively by the propeller. Tests of aircraft engines and propellers were carried out both in the Russian Empire and later in the Soviet Union. There are numerous records of aerosleds being built since 1904, and I have already covered this topic in detail in a separate episode. The early prototypes of wind cars date back to 1922. A number of them were designed by Leonid Vasilyevich Khrushchevsky. Khrushchevsky created these aeromobiles both as a test platform for testing the propeller for his own hydroplane boat design and for the practical purpose of transporting cargo for his design bureau. The prototype equipped with weaponry was most likely a byproduct of testing various weapons developed by Khrushchevsky himself. He was designing gas dynamic and dynamo-reactive recoilless guns at the same time. Another prototype called Nami 36 was created in 1926. This aeromobile was used exclusively for testing a 5-cylinder aircraft engine, which was intended to be installed on U-2 night bombers. As you can see, the period of the 1910s and the first half of the 20s was quite rich in attempts to create windmobiles, starting from what were essentially test stands for propellers and engines, to bold ideas of using wind cars in races, for combat purposes, and even commercialization, like working as taxis. And as practice showed, only the test stands proved to be highly effective. The other options did not develop further due to a number of critical shortcomings of the propeller drive. All the wind-powered vehicles considered up to this point were merely prototypes, built individually or at most in 2 or 3 copies, which hardly qualifies as mass production. And we will also talk about a number of later prototypes, but the idea of even a small-scale production of aeromobiles was already on the minds of designers and industrialists back in the 1910s. Remember the same attitudes of the French military officials. It's time to talk about these attempts, and we'll start this chapter with the most successful production aerocar in the entire history of this type of technology. Before you is the Layat helicocycle car, designed by the French engineer Marcel Layat. Marcel was firmly determined to create a production wind-powered vehicle, and he worked hard to achieve this result. The first 2 helicocycle prototypes, built in 1913 and 1914, had a lightweight 3-wheeled chassis and were equipped with 2 versions of the engine. One of them was equipped with a 1-liter, 18-horsepower twin engine from a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. The other had a boxer engine of similar displacement and power. These prototypes even took part in World War I, together with their creators, and were assigned to the 42nd Battalion of the 1st Artillery Regiment of the French Army. Marcel believed that the development of the automotive industry in its early years could have taken a completely different path if, instead of using wheel drive, it had applied knowledge and technologies from aviation and used a propeller drive. Layat had surely heard about the projects of other engineers, and by the end of the 1910s, through painstaking work, he managed to come up with the most practical concept of an aeromobile for mass production. Even in the early iterations, his creations had a body built in the best traditions of aviation. Later, he came up with a 4-blade propeller to reduce noise and vibration. A protective propeller shroud appeared. A net was stretched across the front to keep objects from reaching the propeller. Look at how, in these shots, 2 gentlemen proudly demonstrate how safe the helicocycle propeller is. One tosses his hat onto the net, while the other leans on it with a hand in his coat pocket. According to the engineer and in practice, the wingless airplane was distinguished from other machines by its high reliability due to the absence of a traditional automotive transmission and a simpler design, as well as its efficiency thanks to better aerodynamics. The vehicle consumed between 5 and 7 liters of fuel per 100 kilometers. Layat's vehicles were much lighter compared to a car with a classic layout. Depending on the version, they weighed from 250 to 295 kilograms, all thanks to the extensive use of wood and an aircraft-style body design. The safety and simplicity of Layat's propeller-driven car, called the Helica, were recognized by the French government, which made it possible to obtain permission for their use on public roads. And this was despite the fact that the vehicle's top speed reached 70 kilometers per hour. The production model of the Helica was presented at the Paris Motor Show in 1921. After that, Layat himself reported that he had received more than 600 inquiries from potential buyers. But during all that time, he managed to assemble only 30 propeller cars and sold just 23. This number was much lower than what Marcel had imagined. Layat was able to significantly improve the design of the wind car compared to the crude imitations of his predecessors. However, it still had the shortcomings typical of aeromobiles. The propeller was noisy, blew a lot of air onto the driver and passenger in the open version of the car, and also kicked up a cloud of dust behind it. These factors contributed to the modest demand. In the 1920s, even buyers of these cars, who naturally, at least for themselves, found justification for this purchase, refused to take them out on the street for reasons of status and prestige. The era of crazy, extravagant forms of vehicles was fading into the past, and the last trump card of such cars, their exotic appearance, no longer inspired many people. Marcel Layat himself, realizing the failure of his idea, created an outstanding wind-powered vehicle at the end to set a speed record. Here it is, the fastest Helica from 1927. This extremely low three-wheeled racing Aerocar with an 8 CV engine reached a speed of 171 kilometers per hour on the Montlhéry racetrack. Several Helicas have survived to this day, and some of them are even in working condition. One of them was tested on the TV show Top Gear, and this Helica belongs to Jean-François Bouzonquet from Paris. His grandfather bought the Aerocar in 1922, and it has been in the family ever since. While Layat was working, his competitors were also trying to implement the Aerocar concept. The company La Traction Aérienne, which literally translates as air traction, introduced the wind car models Eolia and Elama in 1921. Their main competitive advantage compared to the Helica was a more powerful 1.5-liter engine and front steering wheels. But due to weak demand, the company closed in 1926, even earlier than the Helica. This one, the solid-looking car with a propeller and an inline-six engine, was built by George McLaughlin in 1926. No detailed information has survived, and it is also unknown whether this prototype had any connection to the Canadian car company McLaughlin. This two-seater car, called the Air Auto, was designed by the American inventor Curtis Leratz in 1929. The Windmobile is equipped with a regular car engine, which drives an aircraft propeller. During the 1920s, people's perception of the aeromobile was shifting. For most people, the concept of a car with mechanical drive to the wheels was already clearly understood, and this design turned out to be the most practical. But Aerocars became an amusing entertainment for those who understood technology. In the early 20s, some foreign technical magazines, such as Popular Mechanics, even published articles on how to build a wind-powered car or an aero sled with your own hands in a well-equipped workshop. And you know, there were plenty of handy guys who made things like this in their garages. For example, here's a homemade creation dated 1929. This three-wheeled wind-powered car is very similar to the concept presented in Popular Mechanics magazine. And, according to the source, it was built by a certain Ted Jameson, who was 15 years old at the time. It's possible that Teddy didn't do everything by himself, but got help from his father or other family members. The cart with a propeller was equipped with a Harley engine. It was reported that the homemade vehicle had very modest acceleration, as well as limited ability to climb hills. This homemade Aerocar is one of the few that has survived to this day. Wind-powered carts became an amusing pastime for those who understood technology. The basic technology could be easily adapted for snow and ice by replacing the wheels with skis, and for water by making the vehicle buoyant. And while on regular roads, the Aerocar would lose to classic cars in acceleration, safety, and comfort, aero sleds and boats were more efficient in their own environments. That's why they became more widespread and continued to develop thanks to their efficiency. The late 1920s and early 1930s were marked by several more models that aimed for mass production. Thus, in 1932, work on designing the Helicon car was completed. In some sources, including Wikipedia, you can find the name Helicron. This wind-powered car was intended for mass production, but like the others, it was never produced. Initially, the Helicon was equipped with an air-cooled two-cylinder boxer engine and used a wooden frame and body to minimize weight. Steering was done using the rear wheels. The rear track was significantly narrower than the front and had a spring suspension for greater comfort while driving. The car was certified in its time and was allowed on public roads. Several Helicon units were produced, and at least 2 have survived to this day. After several years of testing, the Helicon wind cars were put away in a barn where they remained in obscurity for a long time. One of the Helicons was discovered in 2002. It was in a deplorable condition and needed restoration. The car was restored, and now it is in the Lane Motor Museum in Nashville, and as you can see, it is fully operational. The engine on this Helicon was replaced with a 4-cylinder boxer engine from a Citroën GS with a displacement of 1.1 liters, which produces 54 horsepower, allowing the Aeromobile to accelerate up to 120 kilometers per hour. In the late 1920s and early 1940s, several designers and enthusiasts built single prototypes of wind-powered vehicles. This Aerocar was called Eclair and was designed by Jean Leger from Gien, France. He made all the parts by hand in his shed, except for the engine from an Indian motorcycle, the wheels, and the instruments. The name Eclair echoes the name of a pastry. Eclair in French means flash of light, and the well-known French dessert got its name because it was eaten as quickly as a flash of lightning, a flash of light. Monsieur Leger operated the car from 1930 to 1935, making many improvements to it. He said that the machine drives excellently, accelerates smoothly, and is faster than anything else of that time. The drawback was the noise. It scared people, and as Jean Leger said, he minced many chickens that happened to cross his path. In 1935, he gave up further work on the project. The Windmobile Eclair was kept in a barn for a long time until 2004, when it was donated to Espace Air Passion, the regional aircraft museum in Angers, France. By 2015, the vehicle had been restored. This car project was unusual even for propeller-driven cars because it used horizontal propellers that blew air upwards. Swiveling blades then directed the air either forward or backward, providing braking or acceleration. The obvious problem with this project was that this concept is even less efficient than a pulling or pushing propeller. Notably, the article from the September 1931 issue of Modern Mechanics is illustrated with a drawing, not a photograph. This means that most likely the prototype was never built. A year later, in 1932, an engineer named Jurgens from the United States patented and showcased a very large 4-wheeled car, 3.5 meters long, with a front-mounted propeller and a 100 horsepower engine, featuring an enclosed cabin for 6 to 8 people. Its weight was not that great for such a large wind car, only about 680 kilograms. The claimed maximum speed was 130 kilometers per hour. According to Jurgens, the fuel consumption on the highway was less than 8 liters per 100 kilometers. The car had serious propeller protection for safe use in urban conditions, which, according to experts, indicated a serious intention for mass production. Jurgens' fellow countryman, a certain Ponder, also built an Aerocar. This happened in 1934, and the car was probably intended for racing. In a note from the November 1934 issue of Modern Mechanics magazine, it was stated that the car's maximum speed was 135 kilometers per hour. The Germans took a thorough approach to creating the Aeromobile in the second half of the 30s. At that time, Germany was trying in every way to demonstrate the superiority of its nation to the whole world, and the engineers deserve credit. They designed many interesting and progressive things. In 1938, the well-known company Maybach presented a prototype of the Aeromobile. This German design was somewhat more complex than most wind cars ever built. The Maybach was equipped with a 7-cylinder radial engine and a 3-bladed variable pitch propeller. The latter was supposed to somehow improve the already terrible acceleration dynamics at low speeds, but no information about its effectiveness has been preserved. The purpose of this project is unknown. Perhaps it was conceived as a staff car for the army, or maybe it was intended for wealthy buyers as a luxury vehicle. It is believed that the body was made by Spohn, a company that often collaborated with Maybach on creating streamlined designs. This photograph is much less common online than the previous two, probably because it shows two boys in Hitler Youth uniforms. And this car, called the Schlürwagen, was originally intended to be an aerodynamic marvel, but with a classic mechanical wheel drive. And only by a twist of fate did the prototype later turn into an Aerocar. In the 1930s, German engineer Karl Schlür became interested in aerodynamics, and in 1936 he approached the Institute for Aerodynamic Research with the idea of creating a car with an ultra-low drag body. A full-scale model of the car was built according to Schlür's drawings. During wind tunnel tests, the model showed an incredibly low coefficient, only 0.113. Just to put it in perspective, that's the level of aerodynamic drag found in the most advanced modern record-breaking race cars. Encouraged by the result, the specialists began building a working prototype. Using the chassis of the rear-engine Mercedes-Benz 170H as a base, in 1939, the Germans built a car that was named the Schlürwagen, or the Göttingen Egg, as its creators informally called it. It was a car with a body that resembled a drop of water. The car was 4,328 millimeters long, 1,475 millimeters high, and 2,100 millimeters wide. At the same time, there were no protruding elements on the body. The windows were flush and the wheels were hidden by aerodynamic covers. The body itself was made of aluminum, which is why the Schlürwagen weighed only 1,125 kilograms. Since the engine was located in the rear, the Schlürwagen was able to accommodate 3 rows of seats. The driver sat in the single front seat, and 3 passengers each sat in the middle and rear rows. The Schlürwagen was presented at the Berlin Auto Show, where the public considered the car unattractive. Mass production had to be postponed, as the war was about to begin. The performance of the Schlürwagen was not impressive. It was equipped with a 38-horsepower 1.7-liter engine, which was paired with a 4-speed manual transmission. The Göttingen Egg could accelerate up to 135 kilometers per hour, according to other sources, up to 145, which was made possible by its aerodynamic shape. In addition, the car consumed 40% less fuel than the Mercedes 170, which it was based on. When the war began, Karl Schlür was drafted into the Wehrmacht. He served in occupied Riga, where he worked on the development of military snowmobiles. In 1942, during one of his leaves, Schlür brought a captured Soviet radial aircraft engine to Göttingen. He successfully adapted this 130-horsepower engine to the Schlürwagen, turning the car into an Aerocar. It is completely unknown what characteristics the teardrop acquired, but it looked extremely original. After the war, the Schlürwagen ended up in the British occupation zone, from where it disappeared without a trace in 1948, and it has not been found to this day. World War II forced many designers to put their projects and blueprints away to gather dust in the closet. In fact, by that time, aeromobiles and their creation had become the domain of enthusiasts. From that time on, few people would place any serious hopes on the concept of the aeromobile. For example, this homemade vehicle from the United States dates back to 1946. A rather primitive single-seat cart was equipped with an old side valve opposed engine, presumably from the Douglas Company, and a 2-blade pusher propeller. It's noteworthy that this garage creation by a certain craftsman made it into a newsreel about unusual cars. The next unique vehicle by its very nature can be called the Windmobile from 1940 USA, which had a propeller driven by an electric motor. This type of drive reduced the noise level from the car to a record low, which, as seen in the video, allowed it to move calmly around the city among horses. Nowadays, this advantage seems strange, but during the testing period and before that, it was the main problem of propeller-driven vehicles of that time, causing a lot of inconvenience. After World War II, there were still a number of Aerocars. Several of them aimed for some level of mass production, while the rest were exclusively single prototypes or garage-made creations. And the first on this list is the Aerocar from Argentina. This propeller-driven car was created in 1955 by Eugenio Grosovich and Gianfranco Brici. And the design in many ways indicated that the vehicle was built from scratch, not by modifying a regular car. The Aerocar was equipped with an inline six-cylinder Chevrolet engine with 90 horsepower mounted above the rear axle. The two-blade propeller had a pitch angle of 9 degrees, was 1.5 meters in diameter, and judging by the shape of the blade, it was cut from a larger original propeller. Like all propeller-driven cars, acceleration from a standstill was poor, and it took a long time to reach 60 kilometers per hour. But after that, the car accelerated much more briskly, and its top speed reached 160 kilometers per hour. During testing to comply with safety regulations, the car was even fitted with protection around the propeller. But in the end, it was eventually converted to a conventional wheel drive. Another interesting Aerocar was built in Britain. This three-wheeled Aerocar called TYD 297 was built by 32-year-old Clifford Robbins from Yeovil, Somerset. The propeller diameter was 91 centimeters, and the engine was a 15-horsepower V4, which was reportedly made by cutting a Ford V8 engine in half. Its construction cost £200 sterling and took 6 months. The designer claimed a top speed of 110 kilometers per hour and a fuel consumption of 4 liters per 100 kilometers. Notice that at the beginning of the video, the Aeromobile is easily overtaken by 2 regular cars and a van. In January of '56, the magazine Popular Science wrote about this creation. A very interesting project existed in the Soviet Union. This was the Gaz-16 in several versions: Gaz-16 Chaika, Gaz-16A, Gaz-16B. These prototypes were experimental cars powered by an air propeller and featured aerodynamic unloading. In simple terms, the cars were equipped with an air cushion. Gaz-16 and its modifications were an attempt to create a universal ground vehicle that combined the positive qualities of a car, economy and high durability on paved roads, with the off-road capability of a hovercraft. Gaz-16 was developed in 1960 and built in 1962 by a team from the Design and Experimental Department of the Gorky Automobile Plant, led by Chief Designer Smolin, with the participation of a group of employees from NAMI under the leadership of Konjonkov, and with the involvement of the Sergo Orjonikidze aviation plant. For normal operation, the vehicle used an automotive-type chassis with independent front suspension, similar to the Volga Gaz-21, steering control, and a hydraulic braking system. When traversing off-road sections, the chassis was retracted using a hydraulic drive, and an air cushion created by 2 fans blowing air underneath the vehicle came into play, lifting the vehicle about 150 millimeters above the road surface. The vehicle could even cross water obstacles, although it created a heavy water mist in the process. The engine was borrowed from the Gaz-13 Chaika car, a V8 5.5 liters with 195 horsepower. The first version, Gaz-16, did not have cruising air propellers. For forward movement and maneuvering, the airflow from the main fans was used, directed by special louvers. Tests showed the low efficiency of this solution. The speed reached only 40 kilometers per hour. Control using the louvers turned out to be ineffective. It is claimed that this photograph shows the first version of the Gaz-16 Chaika. As you can see, 2 main propellers have already been installed on it, and this probably happened as a result of the tests. Based on the results of the first stage of testing, an improved version of the vehicle was built, the Gaz-16A. It differed mainly by the installation of auxiliary propulsion engines, 2 motorcycle-type engines with 28 horsepower each, which, through a drive shaft, powered 2 3-bladed propellers mounted on special pylons at the rear. The transmission provided the possibility of reverse, and the movable air rudders on the fan housings allowed for maneuvering. Later, another upgraded version was built, the Gaz-16B. Its main difference was the use of a gas turbine engine, the GTD-350 from the Mi-2 helicopter, with a power of 394 horsepower to drive both the blower fans and the propulsion propellers. Meanwhile, there was still no clear idea of where the GAZ-16 could best be put to practical use. The hovercraft combined the disadvantages of both wheeled vehicles and air cushion vehicles with propeller thrust. The 16th had a complex and expensive design and had low payload capacity. The Flying Volga was deemed unprofitable and the project was closed. A fragment of the GAZ-16. A body is kept in the PAO Gaz Museum. An interesting car was created in 1968 at the University Center FEI in Brazil. FEI X1 is the brainchild of Professor Rigoberto Soler and a group of his students. The team took 60 days to design the Aerocar. This car was not only powered by an air propeller, but according to the developers, it was also amphibious. The internet has preserved a couple of digitized videos featuring the moving FEI X1. There are no shots of the vehicle on the water, even though the car was near a body of water, and it would have been nice to show its amphibious capabilities. The X1 was equipped with a 4-cylinder, 850cc Gardini engine producing 40 horsepower. It was claimed to have a top speed of 150 kilometers per hour on the road and 20 on water. The car looks like it has 3 wheels, but in reality the front wheel is doubled in an aviation style. To be honest, the chassis doesn't look sturdy enough to be effective and safe at speeds over 100 kilometers per hour. The X1 Aerocar weighed 380 kilograms. The Windmobile was presented in 1968 at an exhibition in Sao Paulo. In that same year, 1968, the FEI X2 was developed. It was a design conceptually similar to the GAZ-16. An air cushion, a propulsion propeller. Rigoberto Soler and his students actively used parts from discarded old cabinets in this project, as well as leftover materials that were used during repairs at the university. A speed of 80 kilometers per hour over solid ground and 25 over water was claimed. The aviation company Bead Aircraft from Cleveland, Ohio, attempted to build a practical and protected Aerocar in 1981. The founder of the company, Jim Bead, seriously considered the possibility of mass-producing the Aeromobile. As he said, "For the sake of simplicity of the design, I turned to the experience of my ancestors and put the propeller directly on the shaft of the 80-horsepower 2-stroke engine of this machine." The propeller was modern and multi-bladed, and the car's aerodynamics were well thought out thanks to the company's aviation background. The Aeromobile's advertisements promised incredible fuel efficiency, 4.3 liters per 100 kilometers in city conditions, and on the highway just 2 liters per 100. To be honest, these numbers, especially with a 2-stroke engine, seem quite unbelievable. Even Jim Bead himself never found out what the real fuel consumption was, since the car never made it to the testing stage and remained only as mock-ups and promotional brochures. At the end of this chapter, I want to mention some homemade vehicles. Definitely, from the end of World War II to the present day, there have been far more people who, after reading articles in Technica, Molodegi, and Popular Mechanics, got inspired by the idea of building a wind-powered car and had the workshop and technical skills to do it, then I can list here. A couple of interesting homemade vehicles were built in the USSR. These were fascinating hybrids that combined both wheel drive and propeller thrust. The first was built by Vasily Kurunkov from Minsk. The vehicle could reach 120 kilometers per hour on the highway, 80 on skis over snow, and 50 on water in planing mode. In other words, it was an amphibious machine. Yevgeny Mikhailov from the Stavropol region built a similar little car. It wasn't amphibious, and unlike the homemade vehicle from the Minsk resident, the power to the wheels was delivered hydraulically, not mechanically. This air cart was designed by Bill Bruder from Shelton, Washington, USA in 2001. It is powered by a propeller and an electric motor. This lightweight air car, with a curb weight of about 112 kilograms, most of which was made up of lead-acid batteries, can accelerate up to 37 kilometers per hour. Continuing the topic of combining wheel drive and propeller drive. In 2017, the Daymax C5 go-kart racing machine was introduced. Weighing 200 kilograms, the kart was equipped with a 10-kilowatt electric motor driving the rear wheels, but it also had a propeller drive. A system of 12 turbofans worked together for one purpose: to achieve maximum acceleration. 8 of the propellers worked to create lift, reducing the kart's weight to almost 104 kilograms, while the remaining 4 propellers, located behind the driver, provided additional thrust. As a result of all these modifications, the kart accelerates to 100 kilometers per hour in just 1.5 seconds, which is less than the official world record of 2.6 seconds. Whether it would be correct to call the next 2 vehicles Aeromobiles, you can decide for yourself. Their concept involves the possibility of flight. Essentially, it's a hybrid of a lightweight buggy with wheel drive and a paraglider. The first was built by the company iTech in 2008 and is called Maverick. In 2010, the lineup was expanded with the Maverick Sport model. It is noteworthy that this vehicle was licensed both as a ground vehicle and as an experimental aircraft. Basically, it's just a buggy with a large paraglider wing, a retractable boom that deploys the wing during takeoff, and an engine with a carbon fiber propeller mounted at the back. Inventor Gerard Fee from the company Valen took the same approach. In 2014, this Frenchman presented a flying car to the public called Pegasus. In the summer of 2017, an improved version of the Pegasus car managed to cover as much as 59 kilometers over the English Channel. At the same time, the car was equipped with special marine rescue equipment. The French pilot, Bruno Vizzoli, carefully checked the vehicle before the flight, took off from an abandoned military runway, and, after successfully flying over the English Channel, landed on the water near the English port city of Dover. During the flight, the buggy Aeromobile was shaken violently from side to side, but the brave pilot did not back down in the face of the elements. In both of these designs, the Aeromobile's propeller operates during the final stage of acceleration before takeoff and in the air, while a more practical wheel drive is used for movement on the ground. Yes, the propeller can be used for ground movement, but it's not practical. At this point, you might think the topic of Aerocars is finished. We've covered the vast majority of designs. The video's coming to an end. Let's wrap it up. But wait, if you think about it, all cars equipped with a turbojet engine, which since 1964 have dominated the world land speed records, can also be considered cars with a propeller. After all, they don't have a drive to the wheels, and the propeller, which is a rather complex component, is an important part of the jet engine. It acts as a compressor and forces atmospheric air in for subsequent mixing with fuel and burning in order to produce a jet stream and thrust. At one point, I thought about adding a chapter about these crazy streamliners to this episode, but let's dive into those details in a separate story. Otherwise, at this rate, we'll soon reach the runtimes of Sorin Seranovich's episodes, whose work I regularly rewatch and consider a benchmark. So in the future, we'll cover cars with turbojet engines as a separate topic. While working on this story, I also managed to start a chapter about aerowagons and aerotrains, and I managed to voice and edit the video about Otto Steinitz's development, Valerian Abakovsky's Aerowagon, and the Schienen Zeppelin. However, the deeper I delved into the topic of aerowagons, the clearer it became to me that this subject also needs to be made into a separate episode. So, if you're interested in this, let me know in the comments. I'll try to quickly bring you a story about aerowagons and about jet cars as well. Watching all these vehicles with propellers, you might sometimes get the feeling that you've ended up in some kind of parallel reality, a diesel punk universe. And until you get into the technical details and the physics of what's happening, it all looks cool and even somewhat romantic, if I can put it that way. Cars with propellers. However, once you delve into the details, it becomes clear that there was no future for Aerocars and motorcycles with propellers. A number of propeller drawbacks turned out to be critical when using propeller-driven ground vehicles. Safety comes first. To hell with the chickens, which Jean Leger repeatedly chopped up with his propeller while driving his Aeromobile. And it wasn't just Leger. Imagine the roads of your hometown, not filled with cars driven by wheels like today, but with Aerocars. Traffic accidents would look much more colorful, wouldn't you agree? You can't escape dust and noise with a propeller either. The propeller as a means of propulsion for a vehicle turned out to be practical in aviation. Safety is easier to manage there. You take off at an airfield where there are no unauthorized people on the runway, and the staff present understands the risks and is specially trained. And you're willing to put up with the noise because the journey will be much faster. And I think the noise in the airplane is actually a bit lower, since the engine is out there on the wing, not right behind you or in front of you. Aerosleds and airboats, things are much simpler here too. Aerosleds are used in snowy wastelands, airboats on water surfaces, and the traffic intensity there is minimal. Please understand me correctly, I by no means want to diminish the importance of Aerocars or the work of their inventors. This is definitely a colorful and interesting chapter in the history of vehicle development. But the fate of Aerocars was predetermined. They did not become widespread, and today they can delight us in museum exhibits and in photographs and newsreels as exotic and unusual machines. Such is their fate. At this point, dear viewers, my story comes to an end. I have tried to introduce you to Aeromobiles in sufficient detail. If you enjoyed this episode, please engage with this video. Share it with your acquaintances and friends. Let good people learn more about unusual vehicles. This will help promote the video in the tangled jungle of YouTube algorithms. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do so. There are many interesting stories ahead. This has been the Krasmodo channel. See you next time.